The envelope said Family Court Division. I almost threw it out with the coupons. Then I saw his name, my husband's name, next to the words Delinquent Child Support. I stood in my kitchen holding that letter for I don't know how long. Long enough for the coffee to go cold. Long enough to read it 4 times because the first 3 times my brain just refused. A child. There was a child's name on that letter, a case number, a dollar amount he owed, going back years, years that overlapped almost perfectly with the years I'd known him. My name is Rachel. I was married 4 years to a man named David, and I'm about to tell you how I found out I was never actually his wife at all. We met at a wedding, of all places, someone else's happy ending. He told me he'd never been married, just came close once, laughed it off like it was nothing. I believed him because there was no reason not to. He was thoughtful. He remembered my coffee order. He cried at our wedding, actual tears, when he said his vows. I thought I knew this man. So when that letter came, addressed to him but opened by me because I opened the mail, I didn't confront him right away. Something in me went very still and very quiet instead. The kind of quiet that comes right before you start pulling on a thread you already suspect will unravel everything. I started with public records. Took me one evening. One, a marriage certificate, filed 11 years ago in a county 2 states away. His name. A name I'd never heard him say once in 4 years of marriage. A date. And no divorce filing. Anywhere. I sat with that for a long time. Then I found her. Found her name, found a number, and I called her before I let myself think too hard about what I was doing. She picked up on the 3rd ring. I said his name. I said I paused before I said the word wife, because by then I wasn't sure I had the right to it anymore. She went silent. Then she said, very carefully, I'm still married to him. Not I was. Still. She told me she'd been waiting 8 years for him to sign the divorce papers, that he kept saying he would, kept finding reasons not to, kept disappearing for months at a time. She told me about the child, his child, that he'd stopped supporting 2 years in. She had no idea he'd remarried, no idea I existed. We sat on that phone call. 2 women who had never met, both legally married to the same man, and neither of us had known about the other. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I had to. She wasn't his ex-wife. She was his wife. The papers had never been signed. The divorce had never gone through, which meant, legally, I was nothing. Not a wife. Not a widow in waiting. Not even technically a girlfriend with a fancy ceremony behind her. 4 years of marriage, a wedding dress I still have wrapped in plastic in the closet, a joint bank account, his mother's ring on my finger. None of it counted. Not on paper. Not in the eyes of any court in this country. I had built 4 years of my life around a legal fiction. When David came home that night, I didn't yell. I think that scared him more than yelling would have. I just put the letter on the counter and next to it, the marriage certificate I'd printed out. And I waited. He looked at both pieces of paper for a long time. Then he said the words I will never, ever forget. I meant to handle it. It just got complicated. Complicated. As if filing paperwork was harder than building an entire second life. As if a signature was too heavy a thing to lift in 8 years, but a second wedding wasn't. He confessed everything, eventually. The first marriage. The child he'd stopped paying for. The divorce papers he'd let sit in a drawer because, in his words, he didn't want to deal with the conflict. He had simply moved forward. Married me. Built a new life on top of the old one. Like you'd paint over a stain instead of cleaning it. He never legally divorced her. Which meant he was never legally free to marry me, which meant our entire marriage, the vows, the rings, the 4 years, was void from the moment it began. I am not his widow. I am not his ex-wife. I am legally a woman who once stood in a white dress and made promises to a man who was already someone else's
I
husband. So
understand.
here's where it
And
stands
this
now.
section
My marriage is being annulled
protects your
because you can't divorce a
interests.
marriage that never
good.
legally
Let's
existed.
proceed.
David is facing bigamy charges, and his actual wife, the real one, the one he left waiting for 8 years, is finally getting the divorce she's been asking for since before I even met him. There's a particular kind of irony in that, isn't there? I spent 4 years believing I had something she didn't. A husband, a marriage, a future. She's the one walking away with the paperwork that proves she was right all along. And me? I'm just the woman who showed up in the middle of someone else's unfinished story and called it a beginning.